end. Okay, again, I will begin and start. You should be seeing a presentation on a fair point part of your screen and kind of my ugly mug up in the upper left-hand corner. And again, a chat box in the lower left-hand corner where you can write in at any time. So today the idea would be is to update a little of what's been going new, or at least what I've experienced as new in the world of high mix, low volume, and I will interchangeably call that also made to order lean. And we could go into a lot of terms, discrete manufacturing, all sorts of things. But I really just want to tackle one issue today, and my thought is to continue this kind of on a monthly format, maybe tackling one issue at a time. So to begin with, let's go and look at kind of a quick agenda, and I'm trying to keep this to half an hour. And any of you that might know my background, I've kept it to 10 slides, which is actually quite impressive for myself. So they'll hopefully won't be death by PowerPoint. What I'd like to basically center in on that's quite key today, and it leads to a lot of our made-to-order thinking, is that I'd like to look at how it further refined has become ABC analysis, or runners, repeaters, strangers, and link that to some new software developments that might fit your needs, might not fit your needs, depending how far integrated you are into a current ERP system. But I'll kind of make that link. So really, I want to hone in on this point today: runners, repeaters, strangers, or what some of you might know as ABC analysis, how that fits in to some advances in the analysis itself, and how it can fit into some software. So again, the second point will be the software. And the conversation today is not about software, just how there are some new developments that might be able to help you. And then, of course, we'll talk at the end about putting the cart before the horse between managing and thinking in terms of runners, repeaters, strangers, and then dealing in software in that issue. Okay, so those of you that are new to made-to-order lean, I'd just like to take one slide as basics, that the basic assumption is you're going to push an order in, and then the whole idea is to keep it flowing. So it's kind of push and flow, all right? And in this case, we're going to say push is fine, and push is out is actually what we want in this case. So push and keep flowing. Now, what we're going to really talk about today is the exception to that, okay? And the exception starts to talk about an intermediate pull system and work in process. So the confusion I find in the lean world when I talk to people is they think Kanban and pull that became made famous by Toyota. And my background was I spent 5 years with Toyota, one in Japan, being brainwashed, or we could politely say trained, to come back and train other people in North America within Toyota on their production system. So I have a degree of understanding of Toyota's production system, but I also have a degree of misunderstanding as it's applied in the grander scheme. And one of the misunderstandings is that a pull system, or Kanban, or any words we want to put in, is an objective of lean. The objective of lean is flow, and Kanban is a secondary solution when you cannot arrive at flow, okay? Now, we're going to talk a little about how to think about that today, but it hopefully should be clear to the people watching that what we want is flow. Where we can't flow, we'll look to pull, okay? And we're going to use the 5 steps of lean as a bit of a guidance in this webinar today. But the exception, so where you cannot flow and where you cannot meet customer lead time or balance your demand, your capacity with your demand, because your demand is going up and down and your capacity is not as flexible, that's where we consider this pull, Okay, and I hope that's clear. But again, we want to flow. Where we can't flow, we can consider pull. But pull is not necessarily part of a lean solution. It's part of a Band-Aid till we could get flow. And in some cases, we'll never get flow, and we'll have the Band-Aid, but it's important you that are watching understand that. Okay, so I want to just have you think in the 5 traditional steps of lean, and I've spent a lot of time modifying those where they go into made to order or high mix, low volume. And I use that as a basis of a lot of discussions, and I am planning in the near term to put together a new book on made to order lean, exploring this. But just for today, let's go over the 5 steps. And in a couple of these, I have a little detail under. I could spend the next 6 months talking in more detail under each of these, but we'll just take one point today. So the first step in traditional lean that then we have to adapt to high mix, low volume lean is customer value. That won't be one of our points today. We'll play a little more in the second step, which is identifying and mapping the value stream. And I've deleted a lot of points not to overcomplicate this, but 2 key points in identifying and mapping the value stream is you always fight off determining which problems deserve more effort to root cause problem solve. If you're anything like organizations I've worked with, you have hundreds to thousands of problems at any one time and very limited resources to solve them. So where you decide to root cause problem solve versus just firefight to get through it for the day should be based on a little bit of runners, repeaters, strangers, or ABC. So as we talk through this today, that is one of the thoughts you should have. This sort of thinking, whether it's a runner part versus a stranger, should help you in determining where to invest any problem-solving effort, if at all, versus where you should just firefight. And the second point that is maybe worth just touching on quickly under this point today is the old takt time point. And most of your businesses, takt time would only apply in certain areas where you have enough repetition, but we would generally replace that with quoted times, managing to quoted times and creating a feedback system. The third point, third step in traditional lean, which again applies a little differently in made to order, is flow. How to create flow. Remember, we said in the previous slide, we're going to push the order in and then we want to maintain the flow. So you want to become detectives and experts in every time the flow stops. That is not just the shop floor. More importantly, or as importantly, that is the flow on all the upfront transactional processes, because likely 70 to 80% of your lead time is in your transactional processes, and 20 or 30% of your lead time might be in your operations or on the shop floor. When you get into this, again, we could spend a lot of time, but we'll just quickly say things like the pacemaker, which is part of the takt time discussion, really do not exist in a lot of your environments, or maybe are limited to where you have some dedicated machines to dedicated products, but where you're sharing resources, you need to go to real-time bottleneck management, and the pacemaker doesn't even exist. You cannot determine a pacemaker. Pacemakers linked with takt time, and those are terms very often you can get rid of in your vocabulary, and you want to replace that with real-time bottleneck management. And of course, the bottleneck's always moving in your businesses, so this creates the problem. The fourth, and this is where I was talking before, we want to flow your businesses. We don't necessarily want to create pull systems. And that's why in even the traditional lean steps that the lean institutes around the world talk about, pull is always after flow, and pull should be considered the option when I cannot get flow, okay? And pull is a consideration for today in talking about runners, repeaters, strangers, or ABC. And again, this is where some of the developments in the planning and leveling and Kanban have been. As the complication gets higher, that then software might be a consideration. but the software is only a consideration once we have a better understanding of how this is working and how it's affecting the planning and the effectiveness in the organization. The last step is perfection, and that's kind of the PDCA that most of you lean gurus would talk about. The plan, do, check, act. It's the loop that says, you know, confirm what you're doing. You're running an experiment. You're checking and verifying that experiment. The important point in PDCA is really going to where the value is added again, but at each step. It's not a one-time. So today, what I really want to do is talk about a kind of a fifth step, a new development in the runner repeater stranger analysis. And again, we'll probably offer some webinars in the future on other steps, but maybe the question to ask yourself at this point is, does your organization think? And what I find when I enter an organization is, do they start to speak and segregate things in terms of either A parts and C parts, or runners, repeaters, strangers? And just to clarify, so I'm not confusing people listening, an A part is equivalent to the word runner, a B part is equivalent to the word repeater, and a C is equivalent to the stranger. So when I say runner, repeater, stranger, or ABC, I'm really talking the same thing, at least in the context of today. Now, obviously, ABC has hundreds of other meanings, activity-based costing, and all kinds of other thoughts. Okay, so let's get into the heart of the matter. I want to just go back and talk about the traditional steps in discussing runners, repeaters, strangers, and then I want to explore why this is important in terms of the new developments, and why, if you're not thinking this way, you probably have some opportunity to. So again, runners, repeaters, strangers comes from Pareto's theorem, the mathematician back 200-300 years ago, Italian mathematician, who really created the 80-20 rule, which is the Pareto theorem, Pareto principle, whatever you might want to call it. And it's really stating that 20% of something affects 80% of the results. And I think most of you know, and I'm going to move through this fairly quickly, that basically 20% or less of the products you produce account for 80% of your revenue. And therefore, this can have a much different focus. When we try to analyze this, and most of us tend to do this in an Excel spreadsheet, we go back and we usually look at 1 year. If your business has any seasonality, we have to look at a minimum of 1 year. If it's not a seasonal business, you might look at the last 6 months of sales. And we usually sort out from highest to lowest. So if I move my cursor up, you can see up at the top of the A would be the part I sold the highest of last year. Let's go back here. And down at the bottom of the link would be the part I sold the least of it, say the last calendar year, last financial year. So we're just sorting by sales dollars, or some will use cost of goods sold, and they will not incorporate the margin at this point. Okay? So that is step one we usually do by sales dollars. And again, it could include your margin and include the total revenue dollars, or it could be without the margin and cost of goods sold. Now, there's a lot of weaknesses in that first sort, so we will take this a few steps further. But again, we're going to look at last year's sales, and we're going to try to say, what did I sell the most of by sales dollars? And if you sold $1 million last year, 80% of $1 million would be $800,000 of sales last year, and usually 20% or less of your part numbers make up that, and that becomes the A parts. And I will move through this a little quickly. Those of you who are unfamiliar with ABC analysis, my apologies, but at the end, of course, we'll give you some points where you can get more information. Step two is normally doing the same sort by the quantity, the volumes you sold. Whether it's a raw material and you're selling something in tons, or you're selling in pieces, you will do the same sort by volume of pieces or the units sold over the last year. And what you're starting to look for is what is, if something's an A part by dollar sales and an A part by volume, it probably should be considered an A part through to the next level of sorting, okay? So you've done one sort by dollars. Step two, you've done it by quantity sold. Now again, it's sometimes difficult to compare. You're comparing apples and oranges with quantity, depending if you're building systems versus you have another units building just small filters or piece parts. So again, there'll be problems with these different levels. And I'm not giving you the whole story. There's some other in-between steps and other ways to sort. But generally, the third step is to start to look for what's an A part by dollars and an A part by quantity. Those should probably be considered A parts until we go to the next level. So step three is to kind of group those together. You might have some parts that are B parts by dollar, A parts by quantity. You might decide to move those in the A, okay? But now you have a list of more or less what you consider runner parts. The next step is to now bring your marketing or your sales team in. Right now, everything you've done is a bunch of silly analysis historically. And please bear with me. I'm going to get to the points of why this is important, and the step 5, we'll talk a little of what's new here. But step 4 is to have your sales team look through everything you so far consider an A part, and the sales or the marketing people will know, hey, this isn't going to continue this next year. That was an exception. So they're going to take that forward-looking approach and throw some of those out, and they might bring some B parts up as an A part because those parts are going to be what they feel is going to sell next year. So usually my experience has been if you give your sales and marketing people this list within a couple hours just by looking through it, they'll know parts reference numbers and they can do step 4. Now step 5 could be new to some of you, but this is where some of the more advanced is being done. There's another filter to look at the variability. And I know we're getting a little statistical at this point, but what variability really is how variable and how often are your customers buying this. So I put a little graph on there. You know, you might have a lot of days of 0 sales on something. You might receive a big order, and then you might go back to 0. So, you know, you're going up and down in this sorts of sales. And that graph probably shows even more stability with only 2 days of 0 and then going up. But you might have, you know, months at 0 and then get a big spike order. That variability also limits a part from being an A part or considering that part for a different management technique. Because again, we're going to start to now talk risk and reward of work in process inventory. So this variability might be new for some of you. Variability is defined as the standard deviation over the average, okay? And basically what the findings have been is if that variability approaches 1, it means my deviation, and hopefully those of you listening understand standard deviation, but it's really an average of the distance from the mean or the median, okay? If your deviation is very high in comparison to your average, you have a part that's not very stable. And a lot of you probably experience that. You don't sell, you don't sell, you don't sell, and you get a big order. And we're all victims of our customers, but sometimes our own sales policies encourage that because we have the disease in the world. We think in batch order quantities, and all of us assume if we buy more, we get a cheaper price. So we create some of our own problems with our sales policies in terms of the variability. But this is a final filter that it will actually knock some A parts out, but you can imagine in Excel, it's quite easy to put in a column of the variability. And again, it's the standard deviation. So how much am I going above and below the mean or the median or the average, you could say. And if that number approaches 1, it means you have a lot of variation in how the customer is taking that, and you might not consider it for A parts. Now, Step 5 isn't necessarily the greatest new development, but there are some softwares that will do all of that for you. It's kind of one of the new developments. And there are some that are complete ERP solutions. Now, I'm not trying to sell you software. What I'm trying to tell you today is the better you understand this, you can consider different options. Those of you that are SAP or Oracle users and on rather large systems, your options are more limited to go out and consider any sort of new ERP system. Although I will tell you, I do have clients that work in SAP at certain levels in their organizations and in their manufacturing consider other ERP type systems that feed up into SAP. So don't believe if you're an SAP user and you're frustrated and your eyes roll when you hear that. Don't limit your thinking that there aren't complementary systems. Now, what I'm trying to impart on you today, though, is some of these steps before are important. So let's talk next about why you'd want to go through any of the pain of doing that. And the two reasons I'm going to focus on today, there's many, is if it's an A part, one thing is I would only recommend solving problems at their root cause, whether you use A3 problem solving, you're doing 5 whys and some things, or you're thinking to apply 6 sigma and go to that extreme. I would only think you consider those if it is, especially if the problem is related to a product. Now, if it's a general process problem, that's a different story. But if it's a problem related to a product, I would only root cause, problem solve your A parts. I know this is a little ironic to hear a lean guy saying, but I would take anything that's considered a C part, and if a problem is specific to a C part, I would probably just consider firefighting, getting through it, because you don't know the history and you don't know if that part will repeat, okay? But that's one reason you probably want your organization speaking in terms of, hey, oh, that's a runner part. And when you hear that in an organization, you know the thinking is already there. Oh, no, that's a stranger, that's a C part. And people will come to the table with where to focus their efforts. So that's one point. The second point is, obviously, if it's a runner part, we can take more risk. Now, I'm not talking risk at a finished goods level. I'm talking at a work in process level. We can take more risk of putting in any inventory in the process. If it's a runner part, and if our marketing people tell us it's going to be a part into the future, and they expect next year that will stay a runner or an A part, and if we don't have crazy variability from our customers' buying patterns, okay? Those are two of the main reasons I would consider spending any time playing around with Excel, okay? Now, let me just look at those kind of two reasons a little more graphically on the next slide. So let's just take lead time reduction. Lead time is quite interesting in most of your businesses. If you look at it, and imagine that line, these boxes are anything near proportional to real time. You can imagine that the order fulfillment, especially if you're building systems or complicated technical products, or you're engineered to order, the actual order fulfillment time or the production time is really very small in comparison to things like supplier lead time, order intake, technical resolution, your planning, possibly organizing logistics out, again, depending on the range of products you make, the level of complication. So again, work in process for runners would have you all the way down at the order fulfillment for those high runner parts, and you would maybe have the manufacturing already done, and all you would do is assemble to order, okay, for certain runner parts, and you would be able to offer your customers a short lead time on those. Okay, so that's one reason. The other reason, just to look at graphically, is let's assume this blue line, hopefully you can see it on your screens, is blue, but it's the line bouncing all around here. Hopefully that blue line, in your mind, would represent our crazy customers and the demand spurring all over. And the red line that's flatter would be your available capacity. And I'm showing available capacity as fixed here. And obviously the x-axis here would be time, and the y-axis would be volume. So our customer over time is their demand's moving all over, and let's consider that a common demand line for all your product, for whether it's runner, repeater, stranger, or ABC. Capacity, of course, you can work overtime, you can work the weekends, you can bring on an extra shift, you can buy new equipment, new capital equipment, you can train more people, but all of those take time, and it's harder to shift our capacity lines, all of us. And again, the reason we might consider runner, repeaters, and stringers is at least at our manufacturing processes, where we have capital involved in all, and less flexibility than assembly processes, where we're talking usually training, but we don't have much capital investment. We might consider some work-in-process inventory for our A parts that met all the criteria I spoke on previously, and also had variability less than 1. We might consider keeping those somewhere in our manufacturing, either at the end or the point before other variabilities introduced into the SKUs or the part numbers, because that will keep our lead time shorter up here. And what we can do is when our demand's very high, we will have some inventory to reduce our load in manufacturing, especially where we have capital constraints, training constraints. And when our demand goes very low, that will offer us the flexibility to choose when to refill those runners. And I think that's probably pretty obvious to most of you, okay? And again, the new developments are how the software can help. The new developments tend to be into refining the variability part of that equation, okay? So the good news on that side is everything I've just talked about could be done with software, and I'm not here to sell software, and I'll name 1 or 2 things, but you'd have to go out and find your own. I'm not a software guy. I'm the guy that is trying to help almost eliminate the need for the software, but there are more specialized ERP systems and analysis systems. There's systems out there, things called PFAS, to help you with some of the analysis of your current part distribution. I haven't put those in the presentation because I am not a specialist in them, and I don't necessarily want to promote. But there's specific job shop software that kind of manages the whole chain. If you're a real job shop like Job Boss, you know, it takes everything from integrating quotation, scheduling, inventory. And there's also very special systems, ERP systems, that can link up with existing, if you have, but it's fundamentally a new ERP system, like Dynamics AX, which is a Microsoft platform, that are very advanced in the thinking of dealing with a high proliferation of different parts. Okay? But again, not selling software. What I'm trying to tell you is, if you can manage better with managing runners different than stringers, then once you understand that and have some years of experience there, you might consider looking at other softwares. Remember, your ERP, just before I leave, was bought or chosen by your CFO. And most of you in the operations level have had it pushed down on you. But the sales guys selling ERP systems, especially the SAPs, Oracles, JD Edwards of the world, the big ones, they are promoting it and getting the buy-in of the CFO. So it really becomes a financial system that we're forced to feed into. And I think most of you know all the problems that ERP, enterprise resource planning, or the MRP, materials requirements planning, the older logic, can have in trying to plan production. But again, there's a lot of work that's been done over the years and a lot of new stuff out there. So the softwares can also help in quantifying and updating the ABC part numbers, some of the stuff we've just talked about. Because again, that needs to be continuously updated. So I just showed you a bunch of wonderful things in Excel, but of course, that is at any moment in time. And depending on your customer stability, product stability, that changes quite frequently. The new software can issue, if you're going to use pull systems, because you cannot get the flow, it can issue work-in-process Kanbans in real time through printers and so forth. So you can continuously be recalculating a software solution. But In a minute, we're going to talk the cart before the horse. Most people aren't ready to go there until they better understand their own dynamics in terms of this ABC activity. Some of the software can help directly taking the sales orders and moving them to work orders much quicker, reducing the lead time, and it can, of course, help better plan operations. Those of you who know much about ERP know there's all kinds of unlimited capacity in a lot of the SAP existing systems. Oracle's coming out with, I think, a new version 12, which helps deal with some of that better. So, of course, you can be upgrading software, but you always end up chasing and paying for that. You're trying to eliminate batch and queue thinking, and that's where some of the specialized applications help, and such goes with lead times. So again, some can work in conjunction with existing, and some are replacements. What I really want to say, though, is that, again, the cart before the horse, in my opinion, is you need a lot of experimentation by thinking and trying to manage differently with runners, repeaters, strangers. You need to get the organization thinking there before you start considering anything with software options. And the people that are really developing this lean software want companies that have been developing lean and understand their processes and their part usage better before they blankly cover with the software. I know many of you sitting here are frustrated because you had some software you have it in your organization. It's probably been pushed down on top of you. Those that are in planning and operations feel probably like you're a victim. But before you try the sales pitch on upselling in the company any new software, remember the CFO is probably pretty happy with what he's getting out of the existing ERP system. So my point is experiment first, quantify some results of how this helps you manage, how it helps you meet on-time delivery, those types of metrics before you think. Okay. The last point is just to say that those of you unfamiliar, this isn't really a sales pitch for the book, because the honest truth is the publisher makes 90%, I see 10%. But the made-to-order lean book I have out there introduces some policies. I'm getting ready to start to put together a more updated book, because this book is about 6 years old, and it was written even a year or two before that. So there's been some new learning, but it's still a good basis, and it surfaces different ideas between traditional lean and adapting lean for high mix, low volume. And it talks about that. The other point is there's probably some newer material on the lean-enterprise.com website that I have. There's some downloads there. More videos on YouTube. That's been a push of mine recently. So I've got probably 8 or 9 videos out there that explore some different items, talking transactional processes and all. Of course, what on-site support is offered by myself or my team, and also some new books I have, more about how to deal with cultural change. So that last slide is my sales pitch and really the end of the webinar. This has kind of been a one-way blast, but you're lucky. It was only 10 PowerPoint slides. If I need to, I can get up into the hundreds, but I wanted to keep it around half an hour. What I'd like to do now is if there's any questions, if you could type those in that chat part at the bottom of the screen. I'll wait a moment or two to see if there are any questions and try to answer those. And waiting a minute or two, I don't see anything. We'll go and end the webinar. All right. So we'll see if anyone out there has any questions. I believe you should be able to see on your screen if someone types a question. I know what I see on my screen, but of course I'm the host, so I might be seeing something different. Okay, it looks like we have somebody typing now, so let's see what Lenny is asking and try to answer that question. Okay, well, there's a thank you. Again, I'll wait one more minute if there's any specific questions. Hopefully it's been helpful. Again, more information on the website. I am writing some new articles for the Lean Enterprise Institute, and I will get those posted, so you might want to check that periodically. As you know, the price of downloads is free, so that's always a good starting point. Okay. All right, so I'm not seeing any other questions. I think I will end this webinar. If there's anyone else in your organization that wants to see it, I will post it up to my YouTube channel. It's basically, the YouTube channel is just Greg Lane, Low Volume Lean, but there's links to it from the website. So if this was valuable, again, there's some other webinars I've done on there and other videos you can find on that YouTube channel, but there's a link also from the website. So I will put this up on the YouTube channel. So thanks for attending, and again, I hope you found it valuable. Thank you.